Okay, then I'm going to, with your permission, Terry, call to order the February 29th, 2024 meeting of the Santa Margarita Groundwater Agency. Can I get a roll call, please?
Director Cassidy.
Here.
Director Dillis.
Here.
Director Engfer.
Here.
Director Koenig is absent with notice. Director Mahood.
Here.
Director McPherson is absent with notice. Chair Perry.
Here.
Director Pollock. Here. Director Smalley.
Here.
Director Stiles.
Here.
Okay, and as noted, Director Koopman is on his way. Alternate Director Brown. Here. And we have in the room, alternate Director Leishman. I just want to acknowledge that, thank you. And the other alternate directors, are not participating this evening.
Okay. So I guess I'll just move down. I mean, any reason we can't ask the question about additions or deletions? Terry?
I'm okay with that.
Okay. Are there any additions or deletions to the agenda? Hearing none. Are there any, and this is because this involves the public, are there any oral communications from anybody attending the meeting in the public of items not on the agenda?
I'm not seeing anything in the room. I'm gonna look to see if there's any hands raised for those participating remotely, and I'm not seeing any hands go up.
Okay, great. Then I'm going to acknowledge the new board appointments. The existing ones for Scotts Valley are myself and Ruth Stiles, and Wade Leishman is the new alternate. And for San Lorenzo Valley, Gail is returning, and Mark Smalley is in, and as is Jamie Ackerman as the alternate. Welcome. And introductions. Now, I'm not sure if I have the pronunciation right. I'm going to try Fruce instead of Fruss. Brian Fruce, is that the correct one?
Yes, good job.
Okay. Welcome, Brian, Interim General Manager of the San Lorenzo Valley Water District. And Heidi Luckenbach, the new Water Director for the city of Santa Cruz, emailed me back on the 16th and said, much regret that she could not attend the meeting and that it was absolutely no reflection on her commitment to this agency. And she sent Sarah Perez, who's the principal planner, and Isidoro Rivera, who is the interim deputy director of the water department. So welcome. So now
Online, Chair Perry, there, both Isidro and Sarah are participating as attendees.
Okay, well, hello to them. Thank you for taking the time. So then now we have to chill, right? Because we can't do anything.
We do number 7.
Let's see. We could do some director's reports. But I think let's just wait till everyone gets here.
Okay, and if it becomes a prolonged wait, maybe we can confer with Terry again, but as Rob pointed out, 3.1, the groundwater sustainability program update is informational. It's not an action item.
Okay.
Perhaps we could go.
I'm down with that. Presentation.
Ultimately, does that have to be approved? No? Okay, then we're good.
Then we're good on that, okay. What do you think, Chair? Shall we proceed to
Yes.
that, or do you?
please, let's do it.
Okay. You want, I can pull it up on mine, Rob? Or you can share?
Sure, web.
Okay. Just a minute, I'm gonna promote Rob to a panelist here so he can share his screen.
Recording in progress. It's turned on.
Okay, so before I start my slides with you, I wanted to give you a little update on some of the improvements that we've been making to the website so that you can see some of the information that we're trying to make publicly available. So for starters, how many people visit the website other than to get the agenda? That's why I'm showing it. So we did in the center now of the website, we've actually added this sustainability program. And essentially that's how we like to think of it, right? It's not just a plan, but it's these other things that you do. You do monitoring, you do your annual reporting, and ultimately as we work on the projects, we'll start to put updates and hang them in this structure. So each one of these, the plan, the annual reports, and the basin monitoring have a landing page essentially. So the user, the public can click on that. On the main page, we also do have a link for basin monitoring that you can go straight to the monitoring page. And one of the things I wanted to highlight, this took us just a very little bit of effort this week to add groundwater level monitoring and the stream monitoring information and make it publicly available. So as we were preparing the annual report, we started looking at this map, and this is the map of the 40 wells that we currently have water elevations that we monitor in the basin. So we posted that on there, and the public can see if they're a dedicated monitoring well versus an extraction well that we hit water levels from. It tells them what aquifers we're measuring from. But we also added into there, the Department of Water Resources, over the course of the last few years, has actually been building some nice tools on its Sigma Portal website. And when we upload the data for these 40 wells, we currently only upload 33. We haven't started putting the new monitoring wells in yet, but we'll do that for the spring. They actually put that on their website, and they have links. We've created hyperlinks that the public can go directly then to DWR's website and actually get a lot of information about these wells. So you can see the location, you can see the well depth that's being monitored. It actually shows them on a map, very nicely organized. It then plots the water elevations that we've been uploading in the form of a hydrograph. In the case that there's sustainable management criteria like interim milestones and ultimately measurable objectives, they actually plot out the whole 20-year timeline in advance there. So the public can readily see this information. It's quite nice. So the minimum thresholds on there and the other information. You can also come down and you can hover over and actually get a real time, the latest piece of information, which in this case was September of last year. You can see the groundwater elevations and such. You can actually download all of this information. You can download this hydrograph. You can also, if you're interested in looking at smaller increments of time, you can just take this and squeeze it so that you can look at better increments of time. So it's a really nice thing that DWR has put together there. And I think it's really user-friendly in terms of, the public getting on and not having to, funnel through a lot of things, be able to go straight to the source of the information. So we've started posting that, just actually went live with it today. And then finally, we have the stream flow monitoring on there right now. One of the things that I want to point out, we actually uploaded the 2023 monitoring that CBEC completed a report on, that's there. But one of the stations that we have been monitoring for the last couple of years is actually a real-time station on Upper Bean Creek and Mackenzie Creek. And the site's hosted by Balance Hydrologics. It actually has cell phone service up there. So this is collecting data every 15 minutes and posting it in real time. And so this is flow over the past 6 days. And we can see today we got some rain and it's starting to kick up. And we're at 17 cubic feet a second flow out there right now. So the stage, you can see the water temperature through time, and this one also monitors the water quality, specific conductance. So you can start to see, particularly when you get rain events, the conductance will go down due to the freshwater influence, and then it'll go up when things dry up. So this is a nice site again. It only carries the last 6 days worth of data, But at the end of the calendar year, we'll be collecting the entirety of that and putting that into a sort of a single report as well. So that's the information that I wanted to show you from the website. Let me go ahead and then give you the presentation on sustainability plan. Figure out, yeah. So the groundwater sustainability program. See that. A reminder, we've installed these 7 wells. Last week, representatives from the county, San Lorenzo Valley Water District, and myself went out and visited the well sites and were trained on how to download the data from the 7 wells. I'm not sure you can see what, I can't see that on here, but you can see on the far right, the county will be monitoring 4 of these locations. San Lorenzo Valley will be monitoring 3 of the locations. We estimate that we'll be downloading semi-annually, so it's not going to be a huge staff burden. Also, I'm trained up on it too, so if there's some need to go out at any point in the interim and download data, I will be able to do that. And we set the loggers for hourly readings, and we'll just look at the data as it starts to come in and decide if we want to back off on that. You know, usually about 4 times a day is plenty of information, but we want to set it for hourly so we can see if there's anything really interesting as we start monitoring out there. So we did do some data downloads for the last 2 or 3 months. And just to give you an idea, every one of these hydrographs that's created from that, the scale on the left is 10 feet. So not much is changing out here. Total scale, every one of these. So they're only varying by, in some cases, inches, in some cases, a couple of feet. But again, it will be very interesting to see through time how these behave in terms of longer term. You know, we can see that the 2 on the right, they're in the upper part of the watershed on Upper Bean Creek and then Upper Ruins Creek. And we can see that as we kind of went through, we started monitoring at the beginning of October until you started getting the wet conditions, those groundwater levels just kind of continue to go down because they're continuing to go down slope and feed into the creek systems. Whereas Nelson Road, which is down at the base, that has been flat the whole time because it's essentially a receiving location of all those waters. So it's not continued to contribute. Then when we look at some of the other locations, this is Quail Hollow, up at the old San Lorenzo Valley Wells 8, I believe. And so we put a monitoring well at that location. We see water levels can continue to decline, and just as it starts to get wet, they've stabilized. And Bar Drive is kind of an interesting one too. That's on a slope. We're down slope, and it's at the top of the Monterey Formation. We completed just in the Santa Margarita on top of that. We had a feeling the water was perched on top of that. And you can actually see, and it'll be very interesting to watch as we continue. Here, just the last couple of weeks or so, it really started to ramp up because that water's coming down. It's hitting that Monterey, and it's not going to go down. It's going to build up. So again, just out for a couple of months, but you know, interesting stuff. They'll help us understand the aquifer system through the long term. So dry season monitoring was concluded on October 31st. We did have 1 data logger fail. We talked about that at our previous meeting. I'll show you what the implications of that. They weren't great. And we did complete all monitoring last year within budget. So this is just to give you an idea. Again, you've seen these before. We've been doing this for years. We're just doing it with CBEC starting last year and for the next 2 years. You can see that we monitor the flow in blue. And again, starting usually at the beginning of May through the end of October. And you can see that the groundwater just continued to feed, but the flow just slightly declines. This location is actually at Ziante Creek at Woodwardia. And then we plot also temperature at these gauges. And you know, one of the things, we had a very cool summer. And typically on these temperature gauges, you're gonna see this rolling 7-day average hit 20 degrees at just for a couple of times. And this year we stayed well below it. And so it was, you know, kind of evident. So that's the normal pattern, just this slow drip. and an occasional rain comes in and picks it up just a little bit for a short period of time. This was the station at Bean Creek and Mount Herman Camp where we lost the logger for a month. And so again, the implication of that is not great. We could fill in that data really based on all the other information that we have. But we do visit the sites, and again, the triangles are actually the manual measurements that we collect to make sure that the instrumentation is working as well. And so in this case, we could fill in that data if we absolutely had to. Here's an interesting one with Newell Creek, just above San Lorenzo, where we see these flows come in. And this was actually maintenance activities in Loch Lomond. So water being released so they could perform maintenance. And you can actually see that pick up dramatically. It's really the only tributary that we see anything really interesting happening through the course of the year. But that's Newell Creek as well. So the plan going forward for 2024, and again, I was asked about this at the last meeting, what do we want to do? Do we want to have redundancy at every station so that we don't lose data? And so we analyzed that information to determine that we could go a month without having data at any given location. What we will do is some of those, again, Newell Creek and Bean Creek, that there's a little more interesting information. The lower Bean Creek at Mount Herman, because we have the upper Bean Creek that's also measuring connectivity. I think it's good to continuously look at that coming down. So what we're doing is at those two locations, we're continuing to employ this Aquatrol 200, which collects both the flow and temperature and connectivity. So we want to maintain at those two locations, and we will put in 2 Rugatrol 100s just because we have them as backups there so that we don't lose data. Then we're deploying 2 new Rugatrols. One was purchased last year by Scotts Valley Water District that we had an inventory in the event that we needed to pull that. We'll deploy that. And we purchased 1 more. So we decided to kind of keep costs as low as possible. The Rugatrol 100 is somewhere a little over $500. I think this is a good plan. And we're also monitoring battery life. And that's another reason that at the upper 2 gauges, we're putting the backup, because you can see the battery life expended is a little higher for Aquatrol 200s because they're collecting more data. So we're noticing that it's about 10% burn rate per year, but once you get a little older, that's not a linear thing. So we do want to make sure we have backup. We wouldn't expect to lose them this year. So that's ultimately the plan for this year. And of course, we'll be continuing to maintain the upper Bean Creek, which is shown on the right with the real-time data throughout the course of the year. And this is a picture actually from last Thursday when we were out getting our training. That's the creek flowing at 25 cubic feet a second right across the street from the monitoring well. So this will be very valuable information as we go forward looking at this. That is what I wanted to give an update on. I know there was some an interest in hearing just a little bit about the intertype project with Scotts Valley Water District. So I believe David was going to.
Yeah, I'll provide an update on where we are right now. Nice bullets. I haven't seen this slide, but we did receive a grant in the amount of $9,800,000 for this intertype project, intertype 1. Just by way of a little bit of background, this is a project that's been was first conceived of in 2009. It was part of a larger project back in 2013. It was obviously a very long and most expensive of all of the interties that were being planned for at that time. Unfortunately, some of the grant money dried up, and so this was the first one that was dropped. But we had 30% plans, so we kind of had a semi-shovel ready project to go when this particular water resources relief grant became available. It is planned to be a bi-directional pipeline with a capacity of 1 million gallons per day. The pipeline is 12-inch, it's almost 2 miles long. You could certainly put a lot more than 1 million gallons to that, but the pump station and all the infrastructure in it is designed to either move water downhill to Santa Cruz or pump it up to us. Pump station near the Hilton Hotel across the street on a lot that's currently owned by the fire district. So that's this part of the project is what's called component 1, and this is being managed by the City of Santa Cruz Water Department. And we meet every other week. We have been since August of 2022 to to complete the engineering, get the SEQA documents done. We're currently struggling with some land and easement acquisitions, which are in various stages. But we are in place now. We got 100% plan are in and approved. Since this is a city of Santa Cruz process, that has to go through to their city council to have the plans, the specs, the bid docs approved by city council, and then immediately thereafter they'll go out to bid. Right now, I think it's scheduled for not until May 14th to go in city council. Once that's done, we have we hire a contractor. We hope to have construction underway this fall. That's component one. The other component is here in Scotts Valley, and it's comprises of a new well. We've actually purchased some property, and this will allow us to have a little extra capacity to be able to return water to Santa Cruz during a drought situation. So the way it breaks down, it's about 6.9 million for the pipeline and pump station portion, and 2.8 for the new well, and there'll be some treatment up requirements that are El Pueblo treatment plant that'll need to happen as well. So yeah, so far we spent about 1.1 million of the grant, all on design and CEQA and land acquisition. And we do need to have this project completed by January 1st of 2026. So we're well on our way, but there's a lot ahead of us still. Thank you.
Okay.
Is that it, Rob?
Does the 9.8 cover the entire project?
The 9.8 is actually, it does cover the entire project. The actual grant was for 9.4. We identified after the grant was awarded, there were some things that we are going to need to do to complete the project. And we have an agreement with City of Santa Cruz to split the $373,000 cost.
Great. So, sorry, it starts at the Hilton. Where does it, I couldn't see on the map. What is it?
So it goes down Lamadrona and down to Sims Road. And then there's a little alley called Fire Lane. It's going to go up Fire Lane to Kite Hill Tanks that City of Santa Cruz owns.
Okay.
Cool.
Okay,
Chair. So I'm going to help you with hands waving here. So Director.
yes,
Cassidy,
please.
Question for Rob. When you go out to those monitoring wells to get data off of them, you have to open them up, or is it just wireless?
You'll open the cap,
Okay.
and there's a little, the end of the cable is at the top of the well, so you just
Okay.
connect that to your laptop.
So I keep trying to find the cap to just lay eyes on it at the corner of Nelson and Lockhart Gulch. You could see it at one point, but all that construction there is completely covered.
We
It's always
uncovered
garbage.
Thursday, so if you look, it might still be there.
Okay.
Yeah, and it's fairly close to the road, and it's a little closer to the intersection, the big shoulder, right?
Okay.
It's a little closer to the intersection of that, part of that shoulder,
Right.
and fairly close to the road. So
Okay.
yeah, we uncovered it on Thursday.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Yes. Director Kootman has his hand up here.
yeah, one of the triangles was a little bit off of the measurement, the automatic measurement, and how do you resolve those?
Well, we'll continue to monitor that for now. Long-term, you get concerned about that. That's a drifting instrument, but as we're just installing them and we're collecting information for the first time, it's not overly concerning. I will say, one of the things I didn't know is that all of this information is barometrically compensated. So for air pressure. So we have, it's called a barotrol. There's one located here at Scotts Valley Water District. And you actually put that into the software and it corrects the measurement that's coming off of the instrument. Because it's down in the hole, it's got a column of water above it, and that column of water is being influenced by barometric pressure. So it's a conversion. Sometimes they'll be off a little bit. If they're way off, there's a problem. But mostly what you're gonna see through time is a drift, and that's what's telling you the instrumentation or the cable itself, depending how long the cable is actually stretching.
Okay. Someone, is that good, Tim?
Not seeing any other hands here. That's good. And, oh, I'm sorry. We do have a question from a member of the public.
You talked a little bit about the battery consumption. Does that affect the number of readings? You said you're reading once an hour?
It does.
Okay, so if you go to 4 times a day or eventually 2 times a day, that battery life you'd expect that battery life to be
Correct.
significantly better in those high.
Right. You want to look for the right balance.
Got it.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
Just to interrupt, I'm pretty sure the way it was left from the past is that an alternate director is not a member of the public. Terry, correct me if I'm wrong. Sorry, Wade.
You have the rights to speak.
I'm alternately losing the sound from the room. It comes in and out, but I just lost it then, but it's just muffled and then comes back strong. I'm not sure.
We have switched to a new system in the room here, this OWL system. So definitely for those who are participating remotely, we would like to know the performance at the end. So thank you.
Well, I'll tell you right now, you need to use your big boy and girl voices.
Yeah, you got to speak up.
Okay.
Okay. So do we have a quorum now?
We do.
Great. That is so awesome. So let's go down to the consent agenda, back to 2.1, the whole consent agenda, I should say. Can I get a motion on that?
So moved.
Second?
We have a motion from Director Cassidy
I'll second.
and a second. I'm sorry, I was looking down. Was it Director Stiles? Thank you. Okay, so we're gonna proceed since we are in hybrid format. Before I proceed, I see Director Anker has his hand up.
Just a minor comment on the draft minutes. They should refer to the May meeting, not the March meeting. So friendly amendment to the motion would be to approve the minutes as amended.
Okay, and Director Brown has his hand up.
I wasn't at the previous meeting, so should I abstain from the minutes? Okay, thank you.
Okay. We're gonna proceed by roll call vote, given the hybrid format. Director Cassidy,
Yes.
Director Dillis,
Yes.
Director Angfer,
Aye.
Director Mahmood,
Aye.
Director Chair Perry,
Aye.
Director Pollock,
Abstain from the minutes. I wasn't here at the last meeting.
Director Smalley,
I also was not at the meeting. I will abstain.
and Director Stiles.
Aye.
Okay.
Okay. Let's move to, we did the groundwater sustainability presentation. Let's go to the groundwater sustainability plan annual report. Water year 2023, Rob?
2.2 first.
Oh,
That was part of the consent.
that's not part of the consent agenda, 2.2?
It is part of the,
Oh, okay.
it is part of the consent.
Oh, I see,
Yes.
you're right.
So were we abstaining from all consent agenda?
So Rob, take it away.
Okay, annual report, water year 2023. So for starters, I want to thank Montgomery Associates. We prepared the report with Water Management Foundation staff. We decided to keep some of the consulting costs low, but I'll give the presentation since I'll be here anyway. We didn't create any custom graphics like we have in the past. We pulled a lot of information from the report because we think it was pretty good. So we'll go ahead and use that information. I also want to thank the ad hoc review committee, which consisted of Chair Perry, and Directors Angfer, Stiles, Mayhood, and Koopman. I think it was a pretty successful effort. I like to think that it was. We had a good process laid out, and I think that we made some good improvements to the report. The report organization itself consists of an executive summary, which is required by the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, and 4 primary sections, those being the introduction, what were the water year conditions and the water year use, what did we do towards implementing the groundwater sustainability plan, and then ultimately, what were the results of that? What do sustainable management criteria look like? So that's how we chose to organize the report. So in terms of water year hydrology, it was a good year. We all know that. It was one of the wettest years of the past century. I think it was somewhere in the top 4 or 5. We, in the report, started creating some new graphics, and I think one of those was, we talk about annual precipitation, and sometimes that's not enough. Back in, I think it was 2021 or 2022, we had a fantastic December, and so it sort of influenced towards being a normal type of year, but many of the months were below normal. And it's really important as to how that's distributed through time. So we started plotting on a monthly basis. The normal, which is shown in the blue bars on the top and the red bar on the bottom, this is the Boulder Creek station and the El Pueblo station at the bottom. And so you can see it in almost every month we were above normal, which is fantastic. It was kind of nicely distributed out throughout the course of that wet period. And then we also plot up the cumulative. So that's shown on the right-hand side. And so normal is in blue. So normal precipitation is about 48 inches up at Boulder Creek. We had about 70 inches last year. So you can really say it was a great year overall. Normal of about 40 inches at El Pueblo, and we were well over 50 inches as well. So we can see that precipitation wise, it was a fantastic year. Then we can also look at the same thing from a stream flow perspective. That's the San Lorenzo River at USGS gauge of Big Trees. And where again, we can see on a monthly basis that flows were above normal. We had some, again, fantastic months of flow, but from a cumulative perspective, it's typically around 94,000 acre feet of total stream flow. And we had 240,000 last year. So from the hydrologic perspective, fantastic year. It was also really good from a water use perspective. And we really didn't get into this report, and it's sort of hard to tease out, but it was noted. Director Mayhood brought it up with me, and we were out drilling wells this summer, and we noticed it too. It was a nice, cool year. Really didn't hit what we expected. So we think obviously that had a little bit to do with demand. But in terms of total water use, we had the lowest use for the period of record that we have, dating back to 1985. We used a total of 3,702 acre feet within the basin. It was also the lowest groundwater use in the period of record, 2,361 acre feet, with a long-term average dating back to that 1985 is typically around 3,600 acre feet, 3,686. Surface water use, we use 1,200 acre feet compared to the long-term average of 871, which is what you want to see. In these wet times, you want to practice that conjunctive use. We want to preferentially use surface water. So, the results weren't just that it was wet. It was also that we changed the way that we operate as well. So that's very important. So change in groundwater and storage. This has never been a terribly important number to me, to be quite honest, but it's something that we have to report on. We have to calculate it and report it to the state. It's not actually. Loss of storage is a sustainability indicator, but the actual change in storage for any given year is not really terribly important. And we tend to use water levels as a surrogate for that information anyway, but we do it. Model calculates this information for us, and we calculated increase in storage of 9,900 acre feet. Again, going back through that period of record, at least for what's modeled, it's the largest positive change in storage that we observed. And again, it is intuitive with the wet year and the change in operations. One of the interesting things that we started looking at this year, I think, is starting to look at different timeframes. It's wonderful that we have data back to 1985, but the 1985 is not this region of today. Things have changed. And if you look at the groundwater at the bottom, and I could have pointed this out with the total water use as well, I like to look at 2001 as our peak period. That was the highest demand that we saw in the basin overall, and it's been declining. It's not going to decline forever. but it has been a declining trajectory since then. And I think it's kind of important to start looking at it from that sort of time horizon. So if you look at the entire time, and again, we're required to submit this information as cumulative change in storage through time. That's what this line shows on the upper graph. We're at about minus 34,000 acre feet total cumulative change in storage from 1985 through to the present. That equates to a loss of storage of about 870 acre feet per year. But if you start looking at that from 2001, what have we done lately? That change in storage is just a negative 310 acre feet per year. So it really is showing progress. I think it speaks to the need to expand that conjunctive use, because we're starting to close that gap up to where we can be sustainable. So we reported on GSP implementation. Group 1 are the existing things that we do, and I think there's a lot of good information about that. We're just committed to just doing things like water use efficiency, and other types of improvements, low impact development, recharge, things like that are also successful and important for us to do. Then we have the Group 2 projects, and really that's the San Lorenzo Valley Water District conjunctive use expansion. We're really reporting that. We're working on environmental impact report. We'll expect that to be done hopefully around the end of the calendar year. And we also do talk about the Scotts Valley Water District, City of Santa Cruz intertie. While that is being built currently as an emergency project or emergency supplies drought, it certainly holds promise for future conjunctive use opportunities in the basin as well. So we do focus, I think these are two very important projects from that big picture, that volumetric perspective that we're just talking about, this reduction of storage of 310 acre feet over the last 20 plus years. We also report on other implementation, those other things that we do. And one of those is we have a little discussion. It's pretty small. It's subtle, I think, but talk about funding needs. And we're a little concerned about the ongoing costs of simply complying with SMGWA. And so there's a little message in there to the state that we want to continue to work with them to find ways to reduce things like reporting that we have ongoing. Also in the report, this is a new section resulting from the DWR guidelines that were released in October. They want us to report on the corrective actions that they identified in approving our plan and what are we doing to address those. And so you all know that we got, I think it was back in April, we got the approval. It was somewhere in that time frame, a fairly lengthy letter, and it's kind of hard to go through all that. Well, we distilled essentially what they want us to do into this single table and these 4 actions. And I'm not going to sit and read those for you tonight. I encourage you to go back to the report and take a look at those. I will say that the more important ones center around degraded groundwater quality. There's one of the ways that we identified sustainable management criteria was that if we had degrading water quality, as long as we didn't cause it from our actions, that was okay. And that's a common misperception I've seen in many basins. That's simply not the case. It's not how we're operating. If you have an ongoing problem, then it has to be addressed in some way. So we will have some work to do as we plan on this 2027 is due, the plan evaluation. And these are all issues that we'll have to have addressed by then. And some of them are a little more challenging than others. And I would suggest that we get started on some of those. One of the things that I find interesting that the Department of Water Resources has been reporting on, and I can confirm this is the case because I met with them on behalf of the Mid-County Groundwater Agency with M&A staff. Now that they've reviewed our plans, are much more open to having discussions with us about these things. And so I think there's a really good opportunity for us to sit down with staff this year and really go through some of the discussion about these corrective actions and come up together rather than go out and do it and come back and say, is this good enough? So I think that there's some near-term opportunities to start working on these things and working directly with the department on that. So I think that's good news. So let's take a look at the sustainable management criteria with respect to chronic lowering of groundwater levels. Again, these are all figures and tables that are pulled from the report. We have these wells that we report on. Essentially, green is good. That means we're meeting the measurable objective. Red is bad. You can see there is actually no red, even though these colors aren't the best to read, but we do not have any minimum threshold exceedances. And I think what I would say to take away from this particular table and the way that it's laid out graphically is that you are seeing a pattern of more green emerging, right? Which is good as you go through time. Let's hope that stays up. We obviously know last year was just a really good year, but that's a very positive trend to see in that data. Then we have reduction of groundwater in storage. And again, what we do here is we don't have the model calculate change in storage. What we did was we calculated how much pumping we thought we could do in each one of these aquifers that would be sustainable. And so we have the minimum threshold. If you exceed that, that's bad. And we're trying to get to the measurable objective. That's a level that's sustainable. And again, in 3 of these 4 systems, I'll call them because I refuse to call them Monterey an aquifer. It's a formation. But in the other 3 aquifers, we are actually at our measurable objectives. That's great. The Lompico continues to be the one that it's very challenging to really do anything about. And you can see that the measurable objectives of 1,000 acre feet. Last year's pumping was 1269. And again, that sort of theme around 300 to 300 acre feet it continues to emerge, right? So this speaks to expanded conjunctive use, in particular those areas that are relying on Lompico formation. So a lot to do with the San Luis Valley Water District down in that area in particular. Groundwater quality degradation. Again, green is good. The red or minimum threshold exceedances. And for anybody who hasn't been tracking this heavily, the minimum thresholds for water quality in this GSP were established as the water quality standards. And iron and manganese, we know, tend to occur at very high levels naturally. So you're just always going to see red there. It doesn't mean that we have undesirable results. I do think it's something we should have a discussion on when we do our plan evaluation about whether or not that's actually the right concentration to establish for a minimum threshold in the case of these naturally occurring. That's not about degradation, that's just how it was. And so you could look at what these levels are and say, we don't want to see them increase by some amount, would be an approach that I have seen employed elsewhere. So again, I don't think that there's anything terribly concerning there. We did note, and I did have a little discussion with the Scotts Valley Water District, there were a couple of wells that we noted in the report that they do have the trend of increasing total dissolved solids and chlorides, and you can see the graph here on the right also shows that at one particular well, the Orchard well. And that's actually an area that I'll point out in the report, an area that we shortened the report this year. Historically, we prepared what we call a chemograph. That's this graph that shows the water quality trends through time. And we showed it for every single well and every constituent that we were monitoring. And we decided that we really didn't need to do that. We put the water quality data in a tabular format, which is compliant, and only use these chemographs in areas that were exceptional. So we shortened up the report by, it might be in excess of about 100 pages with that appendix. And finally, the 4th indicator that applies to us is surface water depletion. And of course, today we only have 2 locations that we're monitoring. I've shown down on the map on the lower left, 4 of those newly constructed monitoring wells are probably good locations to do that and start looking at what the data is telling us for starting to establish criteria that we would ultimately incorporate with our plan evaluation and update. DWR just released earlier this month their first document on depletions of interconnected surface water. It really just kind of talks about what is interconnected surface water. It's a lot of definitions. And then they have a couple of other guidance documents that they are developing. They do talk a lot in there about dedicated monitoring and modeling. And it does concern me a little bit that they're not keeping an eye on the big picture of management and focused a lot on analysis. And again, that could be very problematic for us. So we will continue to stay engaged in that effort and try to keep, as I said, sort of the eye on the big picture about management of the basin. To give you an example, when you look at our 2014, 2015 groundwater extraction, which is when SGMA became law, And that is ultimately how you are judged, is what do you do from the effective date of Sigma going forward? Our groundwater extractions in the basin were around 3,400 acre feet. And again, last year there were 2,300 acre feet. When you reduce groundwater pumping by that much, you are going to have a positive effect on the losses from the stream system. You're not going to eliminate them, but you are going to reduce them relative to that activity. So I think it behooves us to stress to the state and work with them to understand that those are management actions. That's big picture. That's the important part, as opposed to all of the detailed analysis that I'm seeing sort of getting forecasted by reading what they're starting to write. So key takeaways from the water year report. We had some really good progress based on sustainability indicators. It's again apparent that the expansion of conjunctive use is really the key to long-term sustainability. You can see that in the data, that it's really the missing piece, and that we really should get started on the GSP periodic evaluation in the near term. We shouldn't wait until the 11th hour for this, and you'll see some of this reflected in the discussion of the draft budget. Questions?
Director Stiles has a question.
Okay. What is the tone? And you may not, feel free to step aside and not answer the question if it's a bad idea. But what do you get as a feeling from folks at DWR? Are they just trying to flip off boxes and concentrate on the places with other districts other basins that are really bad? Or are they really working individually with the various basins?
I think that they will work as closely with us as we would like them to. I think that's absolutely the case. I think that they also believe that, I hear this a lot, that, how would I say it? That they are sympathetic to the expense that we are incurring. But I also think that they still end up putting out guidance that it seems at odds with that. So again, I think it's just important for us to stay engaged with them.
And there was a categorization of the basins originally of high, medium, and low. Could they ever look at high, medium, and low basins in terms of the reporting?
So, well, and again, Sierra's had some encouraging conversations. And again, I think the message is that they really want to see this first 5 years, right? They want to see us get through the first plan evaluation and then start to talk about how could we look at sort of backing off a little bit in some of those compliance requirements.
And finally, I just want to say thank you for the report. Working with you was great. It was, I really appreciated it.
Yes, Director Maynard has a question.
Yes, I just want to second what Ruth said. Rob did a major job of reorganizing the way the report was written. It's much clearer. It was much easier for us to edit because it was only a third as long. And so I really appreciate that you did on that. Now I have a little techie nerdy question that I have for you. And this is, you mentioned that you were talking to Dave about how a couple of your wells in Scotts Valley are showing this increase in chloride and also in total dissolved solids. And I was just wondering if you had any thoughts about that.
Yeah, well, we were looking at that last week and a little bit this morning. I think Nate responded to Rob's concern. Orchard Run Well has been online now for almost 5 years. And it replaced a well called Well 7A. And the wells are about 150 feet apart, the old well and the new well. Now the numbers that we were getting out of Well 7A were actually a little higher than these current numbers that have gone up. And as one of the things that was explained to us that, because when we first turned that on, our water quality was so much better than, it had been with the other well, even though it's 150 feet away. And we were cautioned that that won't stay that way. It may take years, but you're gonna basically end up with essentially the same kind of water quality that you had from the older well. And that's what we're seeing. We're starting to see those numbers kind of get up to where well 7A used to produce, especially with chlorines and total dissolved solids. That's really the only thing I can lay a hand on as far as what's going on with our new well, our newest well, Orchard Grove.
So is that something that has to do with it? It's tapping into some level of an aquifer that is just intrinsically worse, or is it some change? And the reason I ask was I read a really interesting paper analyzing the Tulare Basin, where the guy basically said that you can have a situation where you think you're okay because the well levels are not changing. But what's happening is as you extract water, it's kind of like a closed basin. The aquifer is a closed basin. So what happens is the plants transpire fresh water, they leave the salts behind. And so over a period of time, you can salinize, or whatever the word is an aquifer, especially when it's partly closed like ours is, if it's not flushed enough by rainfall. And he made a calculation that this can happen on a decadal level. I mean, it was shocking how fast this could happen. So I just, I thought it was interesting, and I hope that we keep an eye on this for thinking whether that's telling us that we're, at least in local areas, maybe drawing down too much, and this effect is happening.
Well, 7A was in production for about 30 years, and we're just kind of catching up water quality wise to where that well had been for decades. So, but yes, we certainly will keep our eye on it.
So, in drawing groundwater where we live, when we, late in the year, we get water that's stinkier water, and when it rains, we get fresher water, so the water kind of refills at the surface, you get the fresh water pouring in, and I can imagine a new well might be up near the top where it's got fresher water, and as it starts to deplete and you create that cone, it's digging in the deeper water and more salt than possible.
That's the further name.
Arguable. It's in Monterey, which doesn't really.
Doesn't exist.
Yeah, I think it's the Santa Margaritas.
Okay, anybody else? No, any comment from the public?
There are no members of the public in the room, just an alternate director and staff. I'm looking online. We do have a number of attendees, but I'm not seeing any hands that are up.
Okay, let me just sort of echo what Ruth and Gail said, and I'm gonna turn it more towards the committee, and I'll point it towards everyone else in the committee. It's a really stellar group, and obviously put a lot of time and worked with Rob beautifully, and they are equally responsible for not equally, but they are also responsible for the quality of the report. And I'd like to thank them all, and it was a pleasure working with them. Okay, so do we accept this? We have a vote. Do I hear a motion?
Moved. We have a motion from Director Cassidy.
Second.
And a second from Director Pollock. Roll call, Director Cassidy.
Yes.
Director Dillis.
Aye.
Director Angford.
Aye.
Director Koopman.
Yes.
Director Mahood.
Aye.
Director Perry.
Aye.
Director Pollock.
Aye.
Director Smalley.
Yes.
Director Stiles.
Aye.
And Director Brown.
Aye.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, well done. Thank you, everybody. Okay, 4.2 preliminary budget for the fiscal year 2025.
Okay, I'm gonna present on that one. Give me just a minute. I'm gonna pull up slides and screen. Okay, hopefully you're seeing that all right. As in years past, this is a two-step process. So what we are looking at tonight and what you saw in the packet is essentially a preliminary look at where the agency is, what the projections are for the fiscal year to date, so fiscal year 24, and an initial look at the proposed budget for fiscal year 25. And so this information, a similar table was included in the packet. The version that is showing here has a little more information in that it also shows the increase or decrease over the prior year budget and what that is in terms of percent change. Before we get into that though, just the overall format of this is going to look familiar to those of you who have been on the board for a while. We're essentially utilizing the same layout here. I'm starting with the expenses. We've got the four major categories of administrative services, professional and contract services, and then we're going to narrow in on technical services when we talk more about it, since that's the most significant subcategory within that budget category. We have general administrative expenses and then capital outlay. And so you're going to see a difference, obviously, with regards to that in the monitoring network between the current year budget and next year's budget. So that's the overall layout. In terms of the administrative coordination portion of work, I'm going to jump to the next slide because it shows a breakout on that. As you may recall from prior budgets, this includes two tasks, broken out into two tasks. That is the administrative tasks, as well as the GSP planning and implementation tasks. We've lumped those, as has been done in years past, because that is the Regional Water Management Foundation staff support. So it's Rob, myself, and administrative support from Laura as well. In terms of the overall budget for 2024 to 2025, it's approximately 4.5% increase year to year. We are projecting that we're going to come in under budget based upon the expenses to date. And it may very well be that we do come in under budget for the year. However, with this category, and you'll see it in a couple of others here, we took a conservative approach in the preliminary budget for next year. And so there is a slight increase between 2024 and 2025. That may be something that we consider, that the board may want to consider as we bring this budget back in a few months and we're further along. The budget projections in here are based largely on activity at the midpoint of the year, so through December 31st on most of these activity categories. In terms of, I'm going to jump back one slide to some of the other costs that are, the only other costs within administrative services are treasurer services. Those are provided, as you know, by Scotts Valley Water District treasurer. As we get into professional contract services, which are the legal services, outreach, and audit services, you know, essentially similar budgets on many of those categories, a slight decrease in outreach services, a slight increase in the audit. The biggest increase is in technical services itself. And so I'm going to jump to the next slide again that details what that includes. We kept the top lines, although they're at zero for the years shown here, the model evaluation, implementation, and the periodic evaluation, because those are going to become increasingly significant in the years ahead. And as we are starting to consider the budget starting to shift from just, consideration of a year-to-year annual budget and more, what do things potentially look like over the next several years? Because we know as the periodic evaluation gets underway, costs, related to completing that evaluation are gonna increase. It's anticipated, both of those categories as we look years ahead, are obviously gonna increase. For the current year, and for next year, we just have the annual report that Rob just reported upon. Just a slight increase in cost, or actually a slight, decrease overall from 24 to 25 in that cost, but based upon projections for the current year, slight increase going into the next year from 42 to 45. We have a line item in there for other professional services and monitoring equipment. Those are as needed costs, similar to the example we heard about earlier tonight. If there's an equipment failure and we do need, the agency needs to get additional equipment, that's not just the equipment itself, but it's also consultant costs going up to help and get all of that set up. So there's a placeholder in there for that funding. We kept it distinct from the stream data collection, which you're seeing down below, because the stream data collection costs are for contracted services. So both the work that the firm CBEC is doing under its current contract on dry season monitoring, as well as the work being done by Balanced Hydrologics on the real-time data collection at Bean Creek. I jumped over data management system there. We held that steady. This is the cost for the firm Kisters through a contract with the county to provide hosting to keep that data management system up and running. And then the most significant change within that category that you're seeing is with regard to the funding mechanisms evaluation. So we had 5,000 budgeted for the current year. We don't anticipate that getting spent in the current year. However, we do expect there's going to be, there is more funding that's needed to move forward with the selection of a consultant to evaluate what the funding mechanisms look like. And that's, it ties into the longer term need for the agency to identify other ways to figure out how to pay for compliance with SGMA and the projects of management actions. So both Sierra and Rob have talked about that in the past, and I can turn over to them when we get into questions if people would like more detail on what that looks like. The overall intent is still to see if there's potential to collaborate with Mid-County possibly when it comes to doing that work. They're facing a similar need to look at what those longer term possibilities may be. In terms of the overall numbers, there's a big change in capital outlay from what was budgeted. Originally, that was budgeted 165,000. The actual expenses were higher. Again, this was not a result of the project, the construction of those wells costing more, it just was the timing of activity. And so initially, we thought some of the construction work was going to happen in the last fiscal year. There was a drilling rig failure in the midst of work. It delayed work. So things that happening in June actually happened after July, and it just shifted the timing of those expenses. That construction is done, as you know, and so that's why we're seeing this big drop off from fiscal year 24 to 25, is because there are no there's no capital outlay expenses to improve the monitoring or expand the monitoring network for next year. And so that is sort of driving the bigger picture in terms of looking at the year-to-year budget and why it is lower. You're seeing that overall 21% decrease from fiscal year 24 to fiscal year 25. The last one on there is a designation fund. And so the idea behind the designation fund here gets at earlier remarks about knowing that this periodic evaluation on the GSP is going to be due. Those are required at minimum every 5 years. The plan is to do it on a 5-year basis. If something were to arise and there was a need to do it sooner, basins can do that, but the current plan is that will happen, will be due in 2027. So, we're already a couple of years beyond the original submittal, and activity is the costs to get that periodic evaluation done are gonna increase over the next couple of years. So what this does is it takes a portion of agency cash on hand and puts that in a designated fund to be set aside with the intent that member agency contributions are not spiking just as the GSP 5-year evaluation activity is ramping up. So we have not done that in the past. You're seeing that as a new feature of the proposed budget for next year. I think we've covered the detail on the administrative and professional services for now. So then we're looking at the proposed revenue for next year. As in years past, we have contributions from the 3 member agencies, as well as Mount Herman and the city of Santa Cruz. You're seeing a difference between fiscal year 24 and 25 in that we have now completed the DWR grant. The retention on that has been released, so that's why you're seeing no grant funding for next year, because that work is completed. We are seeing a reduction overall based on the proposed budget from the total revenue proposed in fiscal year 24 to 25. And for the member agencies, we're seeing slight decreases that reflect the lower expenses. There is an increase proposed for Mount Herman. Mount Herman, you see, is jumping from just over 13,000, slightly over 19,000. This reflects some prior discussions and ongoing discussions about having the contribution from Mount Herman be more in line with their usage for the basin. And so it's an initial step towards increasing that amount. And I think that certainly along with the funding mechanisms discussion, the agency is going to be facing over the coming years, really bigger picture budget management about how to deal with the cost of SGMA compliance. So I'm sure that will be definitely a topic of ongoing conversation there. And so I think I'll pause there, or stop there, and see what questions we'll have, and if we want to get into more details on what's been posted.
Thank you, Tim. You field the questions.
I see Director Koopman has his hand up.
Yeah, it looks like our funding is 480 and our $50,000 went into reserves, so for the proposed budget, and so there's $50,000 more money collected than we needed to fund the year. Is that what that?
I'm gonna share that screen. So the question, just in case you couldn't hear.
Question, they can't hear you.
Sure.
Well, online couldn't hear you.
Okay, thank you. The question was inquiring about the to and from reserves line here. And what the negative versus positive amount means here is that actually in these years where it's going, where you're seeing a negative amount, the agency is actually building reserves. So the agency was taking in more funding during those years than the expenses being incurred. Part of that reflected contributions related to upfront match related to the DWR grant and other reasons, but essentially and if we stretch this back, you would see somewhat of a similar trend where agency reserves were built up over time. And it's to the point we're actually looking at trying to decrease member agency contributions and have the budget reflect, the anticipated activity for next year, that actually that is funding that's coming out of reserves, so
So
that's
50 is
going
coming out of.
out of
Okay,
reserves.
so if you add up the stuff above it, it's more than 480?
Let me jump back a slide here.
Like it was, I thought it was less than 40.
They'll be 430.
Yeah,
The collection from the agencies is 430. The use of cash from reserves is 50. That's what we're collecting, the total
The
480.
bottom number is how much we're spending.
That's
not
the
how much
total
we're
and that's the
collecting.
expenditure.
It said revenue and so revenue is including stuff we pulled out of reserves.
Right.
Yes.
We're using
That
cash
was
as
off
a
to the
source
bottom.
of revenue for
Thank
next
you,
year.
got it.
Right.
Okay. And then I have a second question.
okay.
The funding mechanism study was $25,000. So where did that come from? Did the board request a funding mechanism study for $25,000 or where did that come from?
No, that's a proposed activity for next year's budget, so that has not been approved. That's on next year's budget. The board approved 5,000 for an initial look at funding mechanisms for the current year. I think the conclusion from staff is that $5,000 is not gonna achieve the objective of really clarifying what the agency's options are. And that's gonna take a bigger effort to do that. And so that's what's proposed for next year. I know that that staff and Chief Luciera has looked at other examples and gotten information from other basins in the state that are looking at this. And that has sort of informed the approximate amount that we think the agency is gonna need in order to move that along. So Sarah, I don't know if there's more you wanna add.
I'll just add that is sort of assuming that we do go in with Mid-County and sort of partner with them, because there are going to be a lot of similarities and overlaps between the options. So this is sort of what we think, an evaluation of the alternatives would look like, such that we could bring the board some options to look at to move forward. The reality is that anything that we implement is gonna cost a lot more than that. We got a presentation, that small GSA's coalition got a presentation from a consultant that does this type of work, and they estimate that if you're going to do something that ends up going through, say, a Prop 218 process, which would be sort of the ultimate, most expensive way that we could move forward, you're talking over $200,000 per basin, and there really is there's a real economy of scale issue there, where it costs almost the same amount of money for a basin 10 times the size with 10 times the customers as it does for our little basin. So at this point, some of those options may not be on the table for us. We might try to find some middle ground. But again, right now, we don't even know what those alternatives are. So $25,000 is an estimate for a preliminary study that would be shared with Mid-County and lay out some options for the board to look at. And we, at the time that we actually are moving forward, if the board approves this budget at the next meeting, we probably create a subcommittee of board members to help guide that process and to also work with Mid-County on what we're looking at and what our options are.
So it's about 5% of our budget. So if we don't do the study on where to get our money from, then we save 5% of our budget of the money.
That would be a very short-term way to look at it, yeah.
And the funding mechanisms we're talking about are things like some way to, they're not just out grant funding, are they?
No, it would be looking at finding ways to get contributions from users of groundwater. And what that looks like and who those users are is what the options are that we don't really know about, how we could collect money, what the money could be used for. Those are all pieces of a study that would need to be done.
Which would cost $25,000.
To begin with, yes.
To begin with.
Yeah.
Sounds expensive to me.
It is, yeah, I think it is expensive, and we don't have any bids, this is sort of what we threw in here based on conversation, so maybe it's less, especially for partnering with Mid-County to just lay out the options and what that would look like in this area.
Okay.
I think Director Ankfer had his hand up, and then in the room, Director Brown has his hand up. So Director Ankfer, if you want to go first.
Thank you. I wanted to double click on a point that Jeff raised with respect to the reserves discussion. And I guess I'll start with a question, since, really what we're talking about doing here is either drawing down or sequestering $175,000 from existing reserves. I'm not intimately familiar with our current reserves. The balance sheet shows maybe $500,000 if you include receivables. And I'm not, this could be a question for staff. I'm not recalling that we actually have a reserves policy established from a financial perspective. And it gives me a little bit of heartburn that we would talk about drawing down reserves in the absence of such a policy, in the context of the conversation we're having now about the uncertainty of funding going forward. So I'd like to hear the board consider not drawing down the 50, restoring the respective shares from the contributing agencies, which I will note, given the budget reduction, would still be lower than last year's estimated actual or budget, except in the case of Mount Herman, although the decreases would be narrower. I don't have the same level of heartburn about the sequestered 125, because I figure it's just going to be stuck in another fund on the balance sheet and it's not going to be spent right away. But I would think that since we're not going to be funding that with revenue, we should still consider how we're planning to finance the periodic review, whether it's going to be solely out of reserves or whether we're going to try to do that based on some sort of revenue allocation. So I guess that's a suggestion for a discussion and a question about reserves policy.
No, I'm just going to jump in and say that that is something that we are going to be looking into at not on tonight's meeting, but at a future meeting, is what would a reserve policy look like for an agency like this? Do we want?
Okay, so I'll go back to. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No. That is something that is on the radar.
Okay. Then I'll just come back to my suggestion that maybe we hold the 50, that we consider holding the 50 in abeyance, pending that reserves policy. Mindful that much of that could be made up with the apparent economies in administrative coordination.
Okay.
Could I just ask that when we bring this budget back, that we do have also a suggestion for reserve policy? I mean, there are sort of industry standards, so this is not rocket science to figure out what we want to propose, and we could talk about these things and then see how far off, if we're there or how far off we are. And I think that would inform Doug's concern about this 50. If we're close to what we should be having. Right. So could we do, if that's possible, could we do that?
We can do that. Yeah, there have been discussions around absent a reserve policy. There's certainly been discussions at the staff level with regards to what the appropriate amount is. And I know, as Director Anker referred to, there's slightly over $500,000 in cash reserves approximately at year end. We did make projections based upon the anticipated activity to take us through the end of the year that reduces that to closer to 300,000 neighborhood. We are then looking at 50 potentially coming out of reserves, plus 125,000 coming out of not reserves, because technically we do not have a reserve, but out of the cash. And so in the ballpark of around 150,000 available. And so we have taken some consideration looking at, what's the appropriate amount of cash to have on hand based upon average operating expenses. You may recall from last year's budget, we really went in great detail looking at cash on hand and anticipated expenses as a part of the capital outlay and doing a more detailed assessment. Because we're not anticipating similar level of costs this year, didn't go into the same level of detail, but did certainly do ballpark estimates and felt like there was, based upon anticipated expenses, you know, sufficient reserves, but it would benefit staff to have, you know, more clarity in terms of what the target reserves are. And so that's something where, a formal policy could help to inform that.
I'll observe that the city water department aims for 180 days operating reserves, plus some other funds.
Okay.
Mr. J. Director Brown.
No, my question was also about a minimum reserve policy, and I think, you know, when it comes back to the board to sort of discuss what's appropriate, it would be helpful, I think, to talk about like what are the circumstances that would lead us to need to tap into our reserves? Like, would it be just like partner agencies' inability to raise the revenue that they needed to pay based on their own sort of financial circumstances, or is it some sort of catastrophe that we're, I mean, because we're sort of a different agency, we're not a county, we're not a school district, we're not, you know, what is it that we have reserves for, and like what circumstances would cause us to appropriately tap them? I think it would be helpful in sort of setting what that level would be.
Anyone else?
I recall last year's discussion that part of it, the need for the reserves at that time had to do, you mentioned cash flow. And it was really because some of the money would be coming in later in the year. So at the beginning of the year, we needed cash in the bank to be able to make sure it was there, because the cash wasn't coming in yet. It was coming in later. We had to spend the money first. So it was sort of a short-term look. That's what I understood last year, not permanent reserves needed necessarily, but just to get through the year. And I know Director Engfer mentioned about Santa Cruz, and I've forgotten exactly what their policies are, but oftentimes a 50% reserve for a water district has to do with cash coming in halfway through the year or something. And again, or maybe for major projects, you know, you have down the line. And it's sort of, the periodic evaluation money sort of sounds like a subset of the reserve. I guess you'd call them different things, but it sort of sounds like it's meeting some of the same needs, or whether you call it reserve, or it just sort of puts a reason there for why you need some of the money. So I like the fact that you're calling out what it's for. So those are my thoughts.
Okay, and part of the dilemma last year was we had a significant amount of grant funds that were anticipated tied to reimbursement for the construction activities. So that was a complicating factor as well, because we know that there's this lag time between when the agency incurs the cost and reimburses the contractor, and then when Department of Water Resources issues reimbursement to the agency for the grant. So it was sort of an additional anywhere from 2 to 5 months that factoring into that conversation as well. So it's a little more predictable in terms of looking at this year's activities. Yes, Director Koopman has his hand up.
So grant funding is not a large component of what we expect going forward, right? And then the money that's paid in by the agencies, is that come in the early part of the year or the later part of the year? How is that now?
Generally, it is correct. We do not have any current grants. I think there is certainly always the hope that there will be grant funding in the future, but there's nothing on the horizon for that. So right now, it's the agency contributions that are the source of revenue. Those are, as I understand it, typically billed out in full at the beginning of the year. I know we did that last year. There could be some exceptions where a portion is billed at the beginning of the year, and then remaining later in the year. But my understanding is to date, it's always been at the beginning of the year. So I will defer to Nick on that one, since Nick Kearns, the treasurer, is here. Nick, is that accurate? Do you recall?
There have been years in the past where it was collected as needed, but I note that we had a different pattern on our expenditures at that time. We didn't have as significant long-term contracts. So we've looked at it very closely the past 2 budgets and realized that we needed to collect that money in full at the beginning of the year. So that's how we've done it the past 2 years. But going back further than that, you know, there were years when it was collected over twice a year, the second being one year I recall quite late in the year,
because it wasn't needed until then.
Got it, okay. Chair Perry, can you, I know somebody commented earlier about the volume, can the people online hear that response?
Yes, we heard it, that just fine. Every once in a while, the volume goes all the way down to almost nothing and then pops back up. From what I'm hearing. So it's unusual, but it 90% of the time it's working great. The only thing I will deposit in terms of a thought for when we get to this is that part of me thinks having reserves for this agency that's made up of a bunch of agencies that have reserves is that it's a little redundant. Where, how about a possibility where all of the agencies that already have their very large, often reserves, sequester a portion of their reserves with an earmark towards this agency if necessary in the event of unforeseen circumstances. If we're meeting cash flow and everything is being paid for, you have reserves to keep the agency going if there's no revenue coming in. Right? That's why the water district has them. For some reason, there's an interruption in revenue. Nick, correct me if I'm wrong. We have reserves to be able to carry on serving water, or if there's a disaster or something happens. But this agency is a little different than a water service agency. And it seems like there might be a clever way, unless I run afoul of the acceptable rules for these sort of things, that we could use the agency's reserves and make some sort of an earmark or something along those lines. So we don't have this agency have just a chunk of money sitting in the bank. Anyway, just a thought for when we have the discussion. That's just putting it out there. Anything else? Nick?
Director Egan.
Yeah, Director Cassidy has his hand up.
Just a comment to sort of conflate the two things that Jeff pointed out. I don't understand a budget that reduces the assessment of the member agencies by employing reserves that we're holding, whether we should have the reserves or not. That at the same time is then setting aside extra money for funding mechanism evaluation. The two things seem to contradict one another in the same budget. So
I think that with, go ahead, Terry.
I just wanted to remind everybody that section 15.2 of the JPA agreement basically says the board can adopt its budget, and if it needs more money, it can assess all members just by a vote of the board. It says it may also issue assessments for contributions by the members in the amount and frequency determined necessary by the board. Such member contribution shall be paid by each member to the agency within 30 days of assessment by the board. So this is the JPA agreement, and it has been approved by all member agencies already. So in essence, we already have their commitment to back us up if we get into trouble.
So no need for reserves, basically.
But Sierra has
There's absolutely no way I can pay an invoice in 30 days. Just putting it out there.
Anyway, I didn't write this agreement.
Yeah.
It's in there. So
We
maybe,
don't want to lean too heavily on 30 days.
okay, so maybe a reserve account. This makes sense.
Just wanted to comment on Director Perry's description on the district's reserve policy. Absolutely correct in how you described it. Ours happens to have multiple components, and we build it for various 5 separate buckets. The one in there that I wanted to call out is operating reserves. Operating revenue reserve, which in essence is a stabilization, could be used as a stabilization for our rates. So in the context of this, I mean, part of the argument for reserves is to be able to provide steady or continuous contributions from the member agencies.
Thank you, Nick.
In response to Director Cassidy's prior comment, I think, and other stuff can weigh in as needed, but the distinction that I would make is the difference between near-term cash management with regards to where our cash on hand sits now and how we anticipate that being drawn in the short term. And by short term, I mean over the next few years as the GSP evaluation costs are incurred and increased versus funding mechanisms that puts this agency in a position to carry out compliance with Sigma over the long term, that 40, 50-year horizon. I think that is what the part of that funding mechanism is looking at doing. What are the options to the agency beyond just the member agency contributions that might be viable?
Okay, thank you, Tim. Anything else? Anything from the public?
Let me look online and see if any hands go up. I'm not seeing any hands raised there.
Okay, thank you for the information and thank you for the input, everybody. Well-known representative, director, and alternate director appointments. Who's
Okay,
taking?
I have this one as well. So as the board is aware, we have two well owner representatives and one alternate well owner representative. They are to be appointed for 3 years and they serve until a replacement is nominated. Under the current scenario, both of the well owner representatives are beyond their 3-year term. So the board is due for making a determination as to whether or not the directors should be reappointed or whether the board should open a solicitation as outlined in the bylaws. Just as by way of reminder, one of the current directors, Director Koopman, stepped in from previously serving as an alternate to fill the remaining term of the prior director. But both of those terms are due. Alternate Director Hutchinson is serving, her term runs until May of this year. And so while the timeline is slightly different between the two directors and the alternate director, the board does need to make a decision in terms of whether or not they elect to reappoint the current serving directors or open a solicitation. And similarly, looking ahead to alternate directors' term expiring in May, whether or not to reappoint or open a solicitation. That by way of additional background information, the last time an alternate director, alternate director Hutchinson was appointed, that happened after a solicitation process. There were two interested applicants at the time. She was one of the two, and as outlined in the bylaws, the other candidate withdrew at that time, and she was appointed by the board. Prior to the meeting, I did speak with all three of them just to gauge interest. Both of the current serving directors are interested in continuing to serve. Similarly, alternate director Hutchinson is willing to continue to serve. She did note that as her participation similar to what it's been to date, she is generally available to join remotely for meetings, not to attend in person. And so in terms of the process where the board to open up a solicitation, it is outlined in the packet and detailed in the bylaws there. With that, I think I've summarized it.
Okay, is there any discussion?
Yes, Director Cassidy has his hand up.
I'm just curious, Carrie, how did we count towards the quorum tonight?
We have 7 members in person in this building,
Right.
and that's our quorum.
So-
She's saying that
Yeah, except
Not counting us.
two of us, our terms expired in August.
Oh, because the bylaws say your term is a 3-year term and until your replacement is selected.
Okay.
So you are still valid members.
Okay. I just wanted to make sure we shouldn't have bumped this up to the first. All right.
Any thoughts?
Director Mahmood has her hand up.
Well, I'm just gonna suggest, since we've heard that all 3 of them are willing to do it, and unless we have a whole bunch of people knocking down the doors wanting to take their place, I think that both of them are active members, they're here tonight. And so that I would just suggest that we appoint them for the 3-year term effective, and it should have been in August.
So there was some discussion, Terry, would you add on that?
Yeah, I wish the bylaws were more clear, and I did have a hand in drafting them. But it says that they do serve a 3-year term. It doesn't say as of a certain date. So Tim and I were talking today, and the way I read it literally is if they get reappointed today, then their 3-year term starts today. Yeah, that's how my interpretation. If we ever do a bylaw amendment, we could probably clean that up.
I would second your motion.
I think, Chair Perry, I just want to confirm before we go to motions if there's any additional questions from the board, and also if there's an opportunity for public comment before.
Yes, the only thing I would say is the only reason we would, I think both directors are doing a fabulous job. And they would probably know better than us if there were people clamoring to take their position. It would just be an appearance thing that we didn't just go ahead and appoint them. It would also take staff time and work and cost money probably. So I'm great with reappointing them. And I hope no one looks at us as being too clubby. I don't think that's the case, but that would be my only, thing. That being said, yes, let's see if the public has anything additional to say, unless the board has anything to add.
I should have added in my initial description, I apologize. Director Hutchinson is traveling and was unable to attend tonight. So that's part of what spurred the discussion with her, just to confirm her interest prior to the meeting to be able to convey that to the board. She typically has attended the meetings remotely during her term of service.
Thank
you. There are no members of the public in the room here, as mentioned before, so I'm gonna look to the attendees online to see if any hands go up, or see if there's any public comment on this item. I'm not seeing any hands go up.
Okay, so no one clamoring to take their jobs, huh? Okay. So anyway, let's then, is this a motion?
I have one clarifying question for Terry. I apologize. I realize that discussion was clear to me in terms of were the board to reappoint the 2 current directors, it would be effective tonight. With regard to alternate director Hutchinson, whose term does not expire until May, I'm assuming that would renew in May.
Correct.
Okay, great. Thank you for clarifying.
Do I have a motion?
I so move.
We have a motion from Director Mahmood
I'll second it again.
and a second from Director Dillis. Thank you. Okay.
Just for clarity, would this cover both of the actions, reappointing the Director Cassidy and Director Koopman, and then in May, re-upping alternate Director Hutchison?
I think if the motion is made to reappoint all 3, I believe it could be done tonight, and I'll defer it to Terry, but I see her nodding as I think it could be a single motion rather than 3 separate motions.
That's correct.
Okay, great. The last thing I would add as well, with regards to this specific vote, it requires a unanimous vote of the member agency directors. So all the directors are entitled to vote, but the respective member agency directors must unanimously approve. Okay. Director Cassidy.
Aye.
Director Dillis.
Aye.
Director Angfer.
Aye.
Director Koopman.
I'm not part of a member agency, so I'm not,
No, no, you still don't.
so, okay, I.
Director Mayor.
It just doesn't matter if you say that.
That's the rub. Meaningless.
Director Mayhood.
Aye.
Director Perry.
Aye.
Director Pollock.
Aye.
Director Smalley.
Yes.
Director Stiles.
Aye.
And Director Brown.
Aye.
Motion passes unanimously.
Okay,
gentlemen.
glad you guys have signed up for one more go. Memorandum of Agreement for the Santa Cruz Integrated Regional Water Management Program. 4.4.
I have this one as well. I'm gonna pull up just a brief background presentation and explain why you're seeing this on the agenda. Just a second, I'm gonna share my screen. Okay, so in terms of some background on the IRWM program, this is a statewide program. It's been around since the early 2000s. It's a program that was designed really to incentivize collaboration amongst agencies in addressing the whole broad gamut of water resource related issues, more on a regional basis. It was looking at planning across jurisdictional boundaries and watersheds to really try to identify or try to conduct planning and identify projects, particularly multi-benefit projects that would provide broad benefits in achieving those goals. It is a voluntary program, and the way that it was incentivized at the state level was for regions that came together and developed a regional plan. They were then eligible for grant funding through the IRWM program. And so the Santa Cruz region has been active in the program since the development of the original IRWM plan back in 2005. Related to the plan itself, there is the memorandum of agreement that we'll talk more about tonight, but just in terms of a little more context on the program itself, it's not limited to water supply, as you're seeing in the diagram here. It really is water quality, habitat restoration, stormwater, flood. And so again, trying to get regions to collaborate beyond traditional silos and look at achieving these projects through a more collaborative approach. In doing so, the state would provide grant funding for planning, for technical studies, and for project implementation. And so there have been a couple iterations of the IRWM plan over the years, and then most recently an addendum to that plan that looked in more detail about climate change mitigations and responses. And so the Santa Cruz region, which includes many of all of the member agencies that are active in the Santa Margarita Groundwater Agency, as well as the Mid-County Groundwater Agency, have a history of participating in the program. The term that DWR uses for IRWM is a regional water management group. And so for the Santa Cruz regions, it's those public agencies with authority over water management issues. That regional water management group has a steering committee that helps the broader group of partners to identify planning objectives, helped to inform the development of the original IRWM plans, and helped to direct pursuing funding opportunities. The Regional Water Management Foundation has served as a coordinating entity for the IRWM program. It's actually the reason why that foundation was created back in 2007 was to serve as the initial grant applicant for a $12.5 million grant on behalf of the region, and has continued to play a coordinating role since that time. And as you can see from the right side of the slide there, again, the major public water purveyors, as well as agencies such as the Resource Conservation District and various departments within the county that over the public works and flood control have all been active in the program, you know, since over the course of the last almost 20 years. The region has been successful in receiving funding for a number of projects. The map is a little hard to see through the diagram here, but there's over 100 projects that have been funded to date. I'm going to blow it up a little bit and look specifically at some of the work that's been done in the Santa Margarita Basin. You can see a number of those green dots on there represent watershed restoration projects, but it's also funded technical studies looking at conjunctive use. It funded the destruction of a number of abandoned wells, expansion of Scotts Valley's recycled water distribution system. There's a current grant award. The most recent round of IRWM funding included funding for fire hardening water infrastructure facilities in San Lorenzo Valley Water District. And so over the years, the IRWM program has been effective in increasing coordination and collaboration amongst the agencies, and has been effective in bringing funding into the region to help get some of these projects done. As a part of that, the memorandum of agreement has sort of laid out the some of the ways in which the participating agencies would collaborate with one another, sort of the bigger picture objectives of the program. And what's noteworthy about the memorandum of agreement that's before you tonight is this is the first renewal since the passage of SGMA. And so the big difference, a big difference between IRWM and SGMA is IRWM was voluntary, incentivized by the grant funds. Clearly SGMA is not. And when SGMA was passed, there was a lot of focus that shifted, justifiably so, towards developing these groundwater sustainability plans, right? There was a deadline, they had to be done. There was grant funding that was coming in to help support that. And so while IRWM has remained active, clearly there has been more of an emphasis in recent years on what's happening under SGMA. In this region, really the IRWM efforts and the SGMA efforts are seen as complementary. So there are a number of, that were mentioned, technical studies that were done with funding through the IRWM that helped to inform the work that was done under the groundwater sustainability plans. There was funding for groundwater modeling in this basin that helped to then later inform the development of the GSP. And so from our perspective, this is not the case everywhere in the state, but for this region, those two programs, and it's the same group of member agencies that are participating in both. It's just another, we see it as another avenue to advance planning and projects in the region. A big change is that with the state's water plan 2023, they have more clearly outlined what the future programs look like. And so while IRWM is not ending immediately, clearly IRWM is sort of in a winding down phase. We have a recent grant award that's taking the agencies that are in that, you know, the next 4 or 5 years to continue that work. But bigger picture at the state level, they are promoting these new watershed resilience and climate resiliency programs. They're also intending to address issues on a regional basis. But they're not the same as IRWM. And the state's still in the process of rolling them out. They're going to be doing some initial pilot program studies, but we don't know exactly what that's gonna look like. But it does seem as though it's gonna be funding similar types of considerations. How do you solve some of these issues on a regional basis? How do you incentivize collaboration amongst agencies? So it's not, I wouldn't say it's IRWM under another name, but there's certainly a lot of commonality in what the two, in what the new programs look to be achieving. But the reality is that when funding starts to be awarded through those programs, it's gonna be coming through those programs. And so.
As opposed to RW.
As opposed to through IRWM, exactly. And so the benefit we see of expanding the current IRWM beyond just IRWM and what we're calling complementary programs, which is SGMA, which is also some of the existing stormwater programs, and most significantly, what will come through these watershed and climate resiliency programs, which remains to be seen exactly, is that having at this point, it would be disingenuous to say that the region is doing integrated regional water management without incorporating all of the work that's been done through SGMA and the groundwater sustainability plans. And so part of what the MOA is intending to do is to demonstrate that there is still interest among the agencies in approaching things through a more regional lens. And I think the other potential benefit of signing on to the MOA is that we don't know exactly what these programs are going to look like, but we know that if the GSAs and the agencies participating in IRWM are working together, looking at, potential solutions through a broader lens, that's probably going to position them better to compete for the future funding. So the IRWM is voluntary. It does not require a direct commitment of resources as outlined in the memo. It does not intend to supersede an individual agency's ability to do its own planning or projects. It really is back to sort of the initial intent of the program, which is to look at what opportunities there are to address some of the issues we're facing through a more collaborative regional process. So that sort of is it in a nutshell. I would add at this point, the MOA has circulated amongst individual participating agencies. So including some of the agencies that are part of this GSA, I know the San Lorenzo Valley Water District has already approved participating in IRWM for that agency. I believe Scotts Valley Water District is going to be considering it in the near future. City of Santa Cruz has already approved it. The county has already approved it. So the MOA itself, this is, again, initial one was 2006, renewed in 2011, renewed in 2016. Part of the delay in renewing it here is we have known for some time that there were going to be new programs following IRWM, but there was not much definition, and still frankly, there's not a lot of definition around exactly what they're going to look like. But through the 2023 water plan, it is clearer that the watershed and climate resilience is where they're headed. So it does seem in the interest of the region and the GSA as a part of that to demonstrate that it's willing to participate. So that's why you're seeing it on the agenda this evening.
All right, thank you, Tim. Any questions?
Director Cassidy has a question.
How do the two GSAs end up on here but not Papa?
That's an interesting question. That is in part a result of the way the IRWM regions are structured. And so within Santa Cruz region, this goes back decades, but to when things were originally formulated, Pajaro became its own IRWM region because it encompasses the entire Pajaro watershed, which is more than 3 times the size of the county. And so rather than having Pajaro be just a portion of the Santa Cruz IRWM region, it made more sense for the entire Pajaro watershed to be its own IRWM region. So it currently includes water. It also includes Santa Clara Valley Water, as they're known now, and San Benito, because it's stretching across all three of those, so. We are doing work. There have been a number of projects that have been done in the Santa Cruz region in South County. But as there's a distinction between the two regions, so that's why you're not seeing people out here.
Okay, anyone else?
I have a question. Are you being asked to vote on this again? Like, do we want to go forward with this MOA, or is there any downside to us waiting a meeting and learning more about it in the meantime, or?
There's no downside to waiting at this point. It's moving forward through individual agencies, so there's no sort of pressing deadline. The reason it's on tonight's agenda is it has, as of January, it started moving through the various member participating agencies, boards for approval. And so I don't think, other than if the board would like to become more informed or educated about the program, there's not any new information, so to speak, that would be brought to the board in May as opposed to tonight, unless
This is the first time we've been approached, that we've been presented this as a possibility.
True.
It just came in the packet a couple of days ago, so we hadn't looked at it at all.
Yeah.
Be probably better to, I'd move that we'd like to defer it maybe, just to look at it, see what it entails.
Okay.
I recognize.
Yes, Director Mayhew has a question.
I guess I see your point, Jeff, that you haven't seen it before, but the individual agencies have. And so, for example, SLV has agreed to sign on again. And it's really not much downside here. There isn't a big administrative overload, overhead that they're charging us. They've certainly been beneficial to our district, and the most recent one being the fire hardening. But, we have to have a small matching fee, and I think in the past, they worked on conjunctive use studies, and that was really important for us. So I guess I would argue that we should go ahead and approve this, because I think we want to make it clear that we want to work regionally and collaboratively. And because it doesn't hit us in the pocketbook, I guess it's hard to see why we wouldn't.
Okay, anybody else?
Director Anker has his hand up. I'm not seeing any more in the room at the moment, but I see Director Anker's hand.
Yeah, and I agree with Gail. Obviously, the city's on board with this and would support the board approving it. I do have one, which I guess would be considered an impertinent comment at this point, which is that I'd like to see the MOA be a little bit more explicit about climate resiliency. Kind of drops the ball on that. If other agencies have already approved, it's probably too late, but maybe it's a note to draft for the future that that's one of the 5 key priorities for the region, but it's really not called out at that level in the MOA itself.
Okay, thanks, Doug. All right, anything from the public?
Director Koopman has another comment before.
Yeah, one thing is that we kind of, it mentioned flood control is one of the issues in there that they were promoting. And we don't seem to address that in this district. There's other districts that make flood control a priority. And we just kind of gloss over that, even though it's potentially with climate change a significant issue long term. So just a comment.
Okay. Anything from the general public, Tim?
I'm not seeing any hands go up on the online attendees.
Okay. Is there anyone who would like to make a motion?
I will move that we approve the agreement for the Santa Cruz Integrated Regional Water Management Program and complementary efforts.
I'll second.
I'm sorry, just looking down. Thank you. Okay, we have a motion from Director Mayhew and a second from Director Brown. Roll call. Director Cassidy.
Aye.
Director Dillis.
Aye.
Director Langford,
Aye.
Director Koopman,
Aye.
Director Mayhew,
Aye.
Director Perry,
Aye.
Director Pollock. Aye. Director Smalley,
Yes.
Director Stiles,
Aye.
and Director Brown.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes.
Okay, thank you, Tim. Thank you, everybody. Okay, now we go to the annual appointment of our election of officers. I say it with a sad heart, but my term has come to an end. I'm happy to pass this mantle on. So what we're looking for is a nomination for a new president of this board. I think I can just put that out there and see if there are any nominations. Is that okay, Terry?
Yes, there are 3 officers. Tonight, we're going to be appointing the chair, the vice chair, and the secretary. And so I think we should go one by one. So we'll
Right.
start with the chair or the president.
Okay. Do I have a nomination?
We do. Director Stiles has her hand up.
I nominate Gail Mahood. She's been a great leader in the past, and I'm sure she'll do a wonderful job in the future.
And I would like to second that.
Before we go to the second, I think we need to keep saying, are there any more nominations? Hearing none.
So now would we have a vote?
Now let's have the vote, yes.
Okay, Tim?
Okay, and I presume this is a roll call vote again, since we are hybrid. Okay. Director Cassidy,
Aye.
Director Dillis,
Aye.
Director Angper,
Aye.
Director Koopman,
Aye.
Director Mayhew,
Aye.
Director Perry,
Aye.
Director Pollock, Director Smalley,
Yes.
Director Stiles,
Aye.
and Director Brown.
Aye.
Okay, thank you all. Passes unanimously.
Okay,
On to
do I hear a nomination for vice chair?
I see Director Angfer has his hand up.
I would like to nominate now former Chair Perry to serve as vice chair in the coming year.
Any other nominations? Hearing none, I'll second. Thank you.
Okay, Director Cassidy,
Aye.
Director Dillis.
Aye.
Director Angfer,
Aye.
Director Koopman,
Aye.
Director Mayhew,
Aye.
Director Perry,
Aye.
Director Pollock. Aye. Director Smalley,
Yes.
Director Stiles,
Aye.
and Director Brown.
Aye.
Okay, thank you all. Passes unanimously.
Okay.
The current secretary is Director Cassidy, as you move on to secretary, just a reminder.
Do I have a nomination for secretary?
I'll nominate Director Cassidy again. I mean, he's been doing such a wonderful job. You know, I mean, I haven't heard any mistakes or anything. So, yeah.
And I will second that.
Any other nominations? Hearing none?
Okay, Director Cassidy,
Aye.
Director Dillis,
Aye.
Director Angfer,
Aye.
Director Koopman,
Aye.
Director Mayhew,
Aye.
Director Perry,
Aye.
Director Pollock. Director Smalley,
Yes.
Director Stiles,
Aye.
and Director Brown.
Aye.
Passes unanimously. Thank you.
Okay, very good, everybody. I think I just finished this out, right? As the
Yes.
chair, till next meeting. All right, financial report for the period October 1st through December 31st.
I can be really brief. I mean, a lot of the details Tim had already shared as his part of his budget update. This is a cumulative, so 2-quarter report. And focusing on the balance sheet, we had accounts receivable as of 12/31. Our balance sheet got a little bit simpler when we wrapped the grant up. That's no longer, so we've since received the final grant payment and the grant retention. So that's, I guess, one notable update. Aside from that, I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them. Just agency, we had a conversation about reserves. The contributions have all been made in the current fiscal year. So really from this point to 6/30, we're looking at drawing upon that cash balance, and but we should be in fine situation.
Okay, any questions? Hearing none, any comment from the public?
I see a question, or Director Angfer's hand shot up.
All right, sorry, Doug.
Nice try, Chris. Couple of quick ones, Nick. I assume that the answer is going to be timing, but noting the variances on grant revenue and audit services, can you confirm that those are just timing issues?
Grant revenue. Make sure I'm against budget, is that the question, or?
Yeah, yep.
Yeah, that was timing of what we anticipated the budget would be last year, and what we actually brought in. So it's a matter of timing, and that represents the full, like I mentioned, the conclusion of that grant. Audit services, the additional portion for the audit for the fiscal year end is in payable, so that for the fall contract amount, all that's.
Okay. Gotcha.
So again,
Question as relates to outreach services where we underspent. Normally I'm happy about that, but I note that one of our obligations as an agency is to make sure that we're doing adequate outreach. Staff have any concerns about risk of our outreach efforts being inadequate as reflected in the budget?
No, I don't think there are concerns about it being inadequate. I think we are aware that more could be done, but in terms of demonstrating outreach, which is part of what is required during the periodic evaluation, we are mindful to make sure that there will be sufficient outreach that's happening, and it also is very relevant to the issue discussed about potential future funding mechanisms and making sure that public's aware of what the agency is required to do, obliged to do under SGMA, and how that could.
That'll get the public aware.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Start talking about that, we'll get the public aware. Okay, anyone else? Anything
Not
from the
seeing
public?
I'm not seeing any hands go up in the public.
Okay, further staff report on 6.2, anything more than what we've heard tonight?
Just note that the table is being updated and the intent is to really track the water year. So you'll see some things from 2023 and 2022 start to disappear. The only things that stay on are really relevant, like the discussion of what our current fee structure is, right? So things that really should be there for those purposes, but otherwise just kind of dropping off older information and moving forward in water year 2024.
Okay. And 6.3?
6.3 is just in the packet, essentially as a reminder to show all the status for the prior year in terms of the filings. So there for a reference.
Okay. Are there any directors' reports?
Not seeing any in the room.
Okay. I'm going to be attending it's not till May, but the Aqua Conference, and this agency that's in Sacramento this year. This agency is a member, And any of the members that would want to go, we would fund that, I believe is the way it works. So consider it. Nothing, if there's nothing else from anyone else, we'll go to see with future items. You see the informational items and the events calendar. And that takes us to my favorite part, which is number 11. Doesn't have a number, but I'm going to say it's turning it all the way up to 11. And do I have a motion to adjourn? Okay. All right. Thank you, everybody. I wish I had been in the room, but I'll see you next time.